Meeting, which likely could be his final of 2017. We don't know for sure, but that's what he was suggesting, that it looks like it would be. And he was talking about this very differently. And so now I've kind of widened it out. I'm not just calling it tax reform. The president says that the language going forward should always be what that title is, and it is Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Talk to me about how you will sell this now to the American people.
Well, as you know, Harris, when we went into this, and the president went into this, the president was very clear from the beginning, in multiple meetings we had with him in the White House, that he wanted this to be about delivering meaningful tax relief to middle-income families. This bill does that. It also unleashes business in this country with lower rates and faster cost recovery to get the economy expanding and growing at a faster rate. When you get an expanding economy, you create those better-paying jobs, you get those wages back up. You know, the American people haven't had a pay increase in nearly a decade, and so it's long overdue for them to have more money in their pockets. And what this does is means their paychecks are going to be up, their taxes are going to be down. There is a very, I think, different view among the Democrats. The Democrats here in the Congress did not participate. They voted against this from the very beginning, and I think the reason for that is that they have a different view of the world, a view in which you send your money to Washington and Washington spends it for you. We want the American people to spend their own money.
We will see it. Today is just the passage celebration, if you will. We'll see it go in for the president to sign in a few days. I understand that takes a little bit of time. But can you walk us through what's coming next? Because the big question that Americans have now is, when will they feel it?
Right. I think the answer to that, Harris, is the president will sign this sometime in the next week or 10 days. And then, of course, once it's enacted, then the agencies have to begin the work of getting the computers changed, and so the payroll deductions change and all that. But I think the American people who will get tax cuts will start to see that in their paychecks early next year, maybe not in January, but February, March timeframe, when all the paperwork gets done. But that's where I think people are going to start realizing these things that the Republicans said really are true. We are seeing bigger paychecks. We are seeing tax cuts for our families, and we're benefiting from the doubling of the standard deduction, the doubling of the child tax credit, and the lower rates that are included in this bill. So we think those benefits are going to start to be realized early next year. But, as is always the case around here, it takes a little while to get the machinery up and working to make these changes. But these are changes that are good for this country. This really should be a very exciting day and a win-win for the American people.
Speaking of that excitement, how do you now take this momentum into what will certainly be a battle over spending and the government and keeping the doors open, and that has to roll out, if not by the end of this week, then certainly in a couple of weeks in January?
Right. I think that, too, is the next major battle. And, of course, you don't get very long around here to enjoy, something when you get an accomplishment like this, although this is an accomplishment. Yeah, I know. Hopefully we'll be able to, the American people are going to benefit for a long time, but we've got to shift our focus now to the other challenges that we have in front of us. And that's already underway. There are meetings going on even now to talk about the end game and how we conclude the budget process for this year and deal with the other weighty issues that we'll have to deal with next year. I think the president's very interested next year in doing something on infrastructure. There's a lot of talk around here, interest in doing entitlement reform to make our entitlement programs more sustainable. There's a big agenda ahead of us, and we're going to have to turn around January 1 and get after it.
Yeah, entitlements, that's always been very, very tough. Nobody wants to talk about welfare reform and all of that. But we know for Republicans that was part of the platform. That was some of what the president talked about, too, on the trail. I thought it was interesting in his cabinet meeting today, he was enumerating those things that are important, some of what you're saying, but he spent a minute or so on the wall and immigration. What will we wake up to in 2018 that will be different that Republicans are pushing for?
I think what you'll see in 2018 is a fairly spirited debate about how to deal with the issue of immigration, making our borders more secure. Clearly there's an interest, there's a lot of sympathy in the country for these young people, so-called DACA children, who are now, many of them are grown up. But I think that debate will get underway. We have until March to deal with that issue. And if that's coupled with some stronger border security measures, there may be a way in which we could advance some major significant immigration legislation that would accomplish many of the things that we've been trying to do for a long time, and that is to make America's borders more secure and ensure that the people who are in this country are here legally.
You know, it's interesting. There has been some analysis today tying in the national security talk that we saw from the president this week with what you're getting done with economic independence, for lack of a better term, because that's kind of what you build when you give corporate tax breaks and they get to bring those companies and everything back here and build jobs. How do the two go together in your mind?
I think there's really a great synergy between those two. I think what this bill does, the bill that we passed, the House just passed, and that we passed last night in the Senate, sends a message to the world that the United States is asserting itself and asserting its leadership in the 21st century. And certainly that's true on an economic level. This tax code and the changes that we're making, the reforms that we're making, are going to be huge in terms of the international tax environment and making America an attractive place to invest again. And I think that fits hand in glove with our national security interests. We've always believed that when America is strong economically, the national security obviously flows from that and vice versa, but both of those interests are going to be addressed in this administration's agenda. They've made it very clear that national security will be a big priority next year as well. So I think on both fronts, the president is leading, and we here in Congress are trying to work with them to make sure that America is not only safer, but more prosperous in this 21st century.
Senator Thune, I understand they're going to shuttle you over in a little bit over to the White House. You guys are going to party like it's 2017 and you just passed Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Thank you very much for spending some time with us on Overtime to tell us how it got done. Good to see you.
Nice to be with you. Thanks, Harris.
Let's bring in Fox News contributor Charlie Hurt, opinion editor for the Washington Times. You know, he was very low-key there, Senator Thune, and other leaders that we've had on the air, whether they voted for or against it, because we've talked with Issa and many others who didn't vote for this in the House. It never put anything in jeopardy, Charlie, at least down the stretch. But there is this sort of muted celebration at this point because they're facing having to deal with the Democrats to keep the government open.
Sure, and although one thing I think is kind of interesting about the Democrats and the debt ceiling this time, usually Democrats love to play chicken with the Republicans because Republicans are terrified of the government being shut down because they always get blamed for it. But I think this time, I think Democrats are a little bit wary as well. And so we're seeing them work in the background in good faith to actually prevent this from happening this time. And that's a very positive thing, I think. And if anytime you sort of depoliticize something like this, it's probably a good thing for regular Americans.
So why do you think it is that the president, I thought he kind of schooled everybody today when he said, hey, you know, stop calling it tax reform, call it tax cuts. You know, that's what I want him to call it. How important is it now to sell this message in America when really, if you give it 60 days, people, according to the senator who just joined us and others who say that you're going to start to feel this in certain areas where people are getting tax cuts, why not just let it sell itself?
I think that's such an important point, Harris, that you asked John Thune about that. It doesn't really matter. In politics, you still have to sell something. Even after a victory, you have to keep selling it because you have to remind people that, yes, this good thing has happened, but we're the ones who gave it to you, and the other guy did everything they could to prevent you from getting it. The good news here is, while Republicans are not always very good at remembering to continue to sell things, remember with the George W. Bush tax cuts, the Bush administration failed to do just what you were asking about and continue to sell it afterwards and remind people, and so they didn't quite get all the benefits that they should have in terms of politics. The good news for Republicans this time is they have a very different person in the White House now, and this is a president who never stops selling anything, whether it's he's selling himself or he's selling other things or selling the party or selling his tax cuts or selling jobs growth. He will never stop selling. And my greatest wish is that Republicans, I know that a lot of Republicans have a problem with the president and they don't like his behavior sometimes and sort of his style. But they need to stop and listen carefully and learn from this president. This is how you sell something politically.
Yeah. Well, and the messaging. You know, he knows the words. He's saying, I don't know why they keep calling it. They ought to call it this. And if you're not missing that, it makes potentially even this day one in which you're yoked which people thought, oh my gosh, the Senate will never get this done. It will just be the House. But now they're yoked together. Now they're in unison. So it's interesting. What happens, though, as we go down the stretch, and we know entitlements are so difficult, that will be a battle. Do they stay together, Republicans?
I think that that's always going to be a huge difficulty, and I would probably argue that they're probably not, because it's taking something away, and politicians hate taking things away from people. They love to do the easy stuff. They don't like to do the hard stuff. Just like with this bill, they love to spend money, but they don't like to cut things. I wish they would put more emphasis on cutting things. I think that if they did it and they sold it properly, voters would reward them for it. But whatever, it is the right thing. It's an imperative. Our children and our grandchildren will pay the price for this profligate spending that has been going on, and both parties are to blame. Democrats are worse, but both parties are to blame. But I do think that if let's say that after the next elections, you say the economy takes off the way the proponents of this tax bill expect it to. If the economy is really good and Republicans actually pick up seats in the Senate and don't get too badly beat up in the House, I think suddenly they're in a very good position to maybe take on entitlement reform. The problem is that the president made it very clear in his campaign that he wouldn't touch that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think that he could be brought to the table if they came up with a good kind of deal, a good, sensible, smart deal.
I just want to point out, the president says, the individual mandate is being repealed, which means Obamacare is being repealed. Again, handing them a talking point as they go forward. They will fully have to look at Obamacare as we go into the new year. It will be interesting to cover it as it happens. Charlie Hurt.
Absolutely.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, Harris.
A short time from now, Republican and House Senate lawmakers will depart the Capitol for a tax reform vote, celebrating at the White House. So it's over. It heads now through the process. It eventually ends up on the president's desk. But first, they'll shuttle over in buses and stand by those buses. Standing by those buses right now is Peter Ducey. The party is about to end up where you are. Oh, we get a look at them.
And Harris, you can see that they've just pulled the buses up to those steps of the Capitol. A bunch of lawmakers were just leaving. The Republicans are obviously really happy. And actually, I stopped over here, Congressman Roger Williams, to talk about the vote just now. Republican from Texas. Are you heading on one of these buses to the White House?
I'm going to get on one of these, and we're going to go thank that we got this thing passed.
And was there any downside the way that you see it, or was it deflating at all to have to do it a second day in a row because of a technicality?
Well, in a way, yes, but also you can, if you think positive, you can say we got to vote for tax reform twice now. So, but it was a technicality, and they have those over in the Senate, as you know. So we got it fixed, and we're on the road now to give the people a giant tax cut that's going to allow them to really grow their families and their businesses.
Why do you think it took so long for Republicans to take advantage of their majority? Because you've had the White House, the House, the Senate since last January, and it took almost a year to get this big win.
Well, it took almost a year, but it's a big thing. I mean, when you start dealing with taxes and tax reform and something that hadn't been done in over 30 years, it does take a while. And all of us promised by the end of the year. The president promised by the end of the year, so it looks like we've delivered.
All right, Congressman Roger Williams, thank you very much for stopping. I appreciate it. So, Harris, obviously a lot of excitement ahead of this, and we're going to start moving because the police want us to go over where the rest of the cameras are right now. A lot of excitement among Republicans, and we do expect them to be on those buses heading down Pennsylvania Avenue a couple of blocks about an hour from right now.
Yeah, it was interesting. You're talking with Congressman Williams from Texas there. He said, well, we got to vote on it twice. There is a lot of joy over this. I mean, there was really never any doubt. And by my count, I didn't see it change the noes in the House, by the way. There were 12 that we knew of on the first go-around. I believe there's still 12. They've taken my tally off the screen here. But that was never in jeopardy in the House as far as we know.
Right. And in fact, I see another. Hey, Congressman Mast, any chance we can do a quick live question and answer with you about the vote? We are live. All right. So we see Congressman Brian Mast over here from Florida.
Tell him hi for me. He looks so comfortable seated there.
Harris Faulkner says hello. Are you heading on the buses to the White House?
Yeah, eventually. Just sitting out here enjoying the weather for now.
What was the mood among Republicans about having to do this 2 days in a row?
Look, we would have preferred that there not be any glitches in the system. Sometimes that happens, but we fixed the glitch and we move forward, and, we have an outstanding bill for the American people.
What are you hearing from constituents in the last day or so about both tax votes?
It's outstanding for my district. When I look at my district, right, and I talk to people about it, I've got 42,000 families in my district that take a child tax credit for 1, 2, 3, 4+ kids. That's huge for them. 70% of the people that file taxes in my district, they take the standard deduction. So when you double that standard deduction from 6 to 12, 9 to 18, 12 to 24, that's huge for the people in my district. When you look at, we probably got 60% of the businesses in our area are small business pass-throughs. This is big for them. Having that first 70,000, 75,000 only taxed at 9%, that's great for these businesses, these small businesses in my community. So it's really, really well received. People are happy about it.
Took a good part of a year to finally see Republicans take advantage of having the White House and the House and the Senate. What's next?
Well, we're going to be working on infrastructure. That's going to be one of the biggest things. I sit on the Committee of Transportation and Infrastructure, so I'm looking very much forward to that one. And, we'll keep plugging along, working on the deregulation front, making sure that this is a friendly place to go out there and do business, that it's the friendliest place. What we did with taxes was very, very big for that, making sure that we can have a competitive code compared to those other countries that are trying to pull our businesses away and over to their shores, and that's a lot more of it.
All right. Sorry to just come over to the bench with a live camera, but thank you very much for your time today, Congressman.
I know. Hey, Peter, before you let him go,
circulating. It's a little bit chilly out here.
All right. Well, have fun at the White House, Congressman.
I don't know if you can hear me. Well, you're walking away. I was going to get in a quick question with him before you walk away. He mentioned those 42.
Of course. Yeah. No, Harris has a question for you.
Those 42,000.
Harris, what is your question? I can relay.
Well, those 42,000 families. We've been hearing how many talks they had and how many breakouts of meetings they had. Did this lawmaker get a chance to speak to the issue, and was there much of a fight over whether or not they were going to raise that child credit
That's a long question.
In the House? We know what was happening on the Senate side.
Was there much discussion about the child tax credit, and are you hearing a lot about that from your constituents?
It's something that I speak to my constituents about, telling them just how important this is. When you bring that from $1,000 up to $2,000, that's a really big thing for those families. You take a family that maybe they're in my area. We got a lot of people that work on pools. A lot of people that go out there in the landscaping business. Maybe they're a pass-through business making somewhere around $100,000 with 2 kids in school. So you look at what that pass-through deduction does. Having it only taxed at 9% for the first $75,000, and then a child tax credit for 2 kids going up to $2,000 for each child. That is big. That's a big win for these families in my district, and they're happy about it.
All right.
Harris, any more questions?
No, that's it. Tell him thanks.
Harris says thank you. All right.
Yeah.
Thanks again,
All right.
Congressman.
All right, Peter. So
thank you. Merry Christmas to you too.
Merry Christmas, Peter. I know you're grabbing people as they get on the buses to shuttle over to the White House for the big celebration. We may come back as the action cooks up there, and lawmakers want to talk about the victory that they had among the GOP on the Hill with Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. Peter, thank you.
Harris.
So this is a huge day, as you know. This affects millions of Americans, working Americans. You heard the president today as he was meeting with his cabinet, potentially for the last meeting of the year with them, talking about farmers and small businesses and the engine drivers that they are in terms of hiring so many people across the country, and what certain elements of this tax bill really mean to them. So breaking it out maybe in some fresh and new ways, it will head to his desk, and we will head right back with you live after this. Breaking news as the nation sees a new Tax Cuts Jobs Act voted yes by the House for a second time and yes by the Senate. So now it heads to the president's desk. A big day. Let's bring in the power panel. Katie Pavlich, back from Outnumbered. She's editor of townhall.com. Zach Buchanan is a former advisor for the Democratic National Committee. Great to see you both. So, Katie, there we were. We were waiting for the House to finish its debate, and we asked, why are they debating? They did this already yesterday, but they went through that procedure, and then they voted. And then we had Senator Thune on that was they're kind of subdued a little bit because they know they have a fight ahead of them with the spending bill. But today,
Well, this is a big deal. It's a historic day for the president, for the American people. It's astonishing to me that every single Democrat voted against the middle class when they claim to be representing the middle class. Why they would decide to do that simply to oppose President Trump's agenda, I'm not sure, but it's a cherry on top to a year full of accomplishments for the White House.
Your head's going to shake off if you keep shaking your head at Katie. What's going on, Zach?
I mean, look, I think it's very true that this is a big day for the Trump administration as well as congressional Republicans, because they are going to own this tax bill going into 2018, and the American people aren't fooled about it. 64%, according to USA Today, believe that it just helps the billionaires mostly, and 52% believe that it hurts their families. And the reason is this.
Have you read it?
Have I read the whole bill?
Yeah, I mean, well, there's some short
I've read
versions.
pretty large
Okay,
sections
you
of
read
it. I read more than Senator Corker. Let's say that.
Okay. You knew he was going to throw some shade. Yeah, but you are the party who promised to pass something to find out what's in it. Let's just go there. But
well, that's actually not true. But the tax Policy Center, for example, looked at this bill and they compared it to the Bush tax cuts. Under the Bush tax cuts, 27% of those tax cuts went to the top 1%, the wealthiest 1%. In this tax bill, 83% of the tax cuts go to the top 1%, to the wealthiest 1%.
That's actually not true. The 80% of the middle class is going to get a tax cut. The Washington Post has a tax cut calculator. You can put in how much you make. You can put in your deductions, and it will tell you exactly how much money
you're going to keep. That doesn't contradict what I said. But what you're saying is that everybody's getting a tax cut, and that's technically true. People are going to get a very, very, very tiny tax cut that expires.
$2,000 to a family making $45,000 a year is not a tiny, tiny tax cut.
We're talking about a tiny tax cut that expires compared to corporations that are going to see their rates drop by 40% permanently. That's $1.4 trillion going to corporations, while middle class taxpayers get a teeny tiny throwaway that expires.
This is my question for the left, though, on this. It's like you can't do a solid in terms of jobs and allow the corporate tax rate to come down so they can bring back jobs back to America, back to the middle class, while at the same time giving a tax break to hardworking middle class families. It's like as long as corporations are getting any kind of break, you guys are not forgiving the middle class.
I'm going to jump back in here.
I'm sorry, but
Zach, let me jump back in because I want to say this. Republicans now are being tasked to go out and sell this. And they're not just going to be talking with Republicans. So, Katie, while I hear what you're saying, the points that Zach is making are some of the areas that the GOP is going to be hit with. And what are the responses?
Well, it's one of those situations where we will have to wait and see. You know, the Republicans have not done a good job of selling this to the American people. As you said, the number on the polling is not a good one. However, when you go out on the street, you go to these local communities and you ask people, do you want your taxes to go down?
Well, who says
they
no to
inevitably say yes. So if their taxes are going down, they're for the bill. The way the questions are asked about what the legislation means for them is different. So when this goes into implementation in February, you're right. Republicans will have to own this. And Democrats are also going to have to own the fact that they voted against people keeping their own money.
But people see how they've been schnookered. They see the fact that...
How have they been schnookered?
Because
how is keeping more of your own money
because what you could have done is made the tax cuts for the middle class permanent and made the ones for the corporations temporary.
What you did is
you made the ones for the middle class to be temporary and very small, and you made the ones for the corporations very large and permanent.
I think that there's a fair argument to be made there. I agree with you. However, the idea that you're saying that it's a bad deal overall because both sides are getting some kind of break in the temporary.
One side is getting very, very small. One side is getting very, very big, and it's adding $1.5 trillion to the debt. But
you keep talking about the middle class getting a very, very small tax break. Go talk to individual families who are now saying, I'm going to have $2,500 extra to save for my kid's college account. I'm going to have $1,000 extra to get braces for
what the top 1% are getting? Do you want to compare those two numbers?
Okay, so let's talk about the corporations. The corporations create jobs for people to work and to bring home paychecks. So this idea that corporations are not going to expand, we've had CEOs say that they're going to
making the rate more competitive is not a good idea. The problem is the way that this was done. It is overwhelmingly weighted toward large corporations, toward Wall Street banks, toward the people that the 6,200 lobbyists that helped write this bill. That's 57% of lobbyists in Washington, D.C. had a hand.
You guys could go around, but it's my understanding that Democrats had a chance to step into this.
Absolutely false. Absolutely false.
Why didn't Democrats come up with their own bill?
I'm going to take the opportunity to ask one.
Great.
Sit tight. Interesting conversation. Again, the GOP will have some answers on the trail when they get there. And you've got the questions. Congressional Democrats lambasting their Republican colleagues following their major legislative victory of passing sweeping tax reform legislation. You got a little taste of that from Zach McCannis here. The Democrats have slammed the bill as highway robbery. I'm quoting them now, a giveaway to the super rich and just plain cruel, and have said the GOP will pay at the polls. But Republican Senator John Thune, who just joined us a few moments ago, pushed back. Watch.
There is a very, I think, different view among the Democrats. The Democrats here in the Congress did not participate. They voted against this from the very beginning, and I think the reason for that is that they have a different view of the world, a view in which you send your money to Washington and Washington spends it for you. We want the American people to spend their own money.
Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen is a member of the Senate Budget Committee. He joins me now from Capitol Hill, and I don't know if you could hear the fiery discussion that was going on just right here on set. But we have a Democrat strategist who says that you guys didn't have an opportunity to put your voices in. I've read something different. What happened?
Well, what happened, Harris, is we did have certain principles going into this tax debate. And one of them was that we should not raise taxes on anybody in the middle class. And you may recall that both Speaker Ryan and Republican leader McConnell at different points said that this will not raise taxes on a single American middle class family. And they both had to admit that's just not true. And so to call this a middle-class tax cut when it will raise taxes on 11 million American families, including hundreds of thousands in my state of Maryland, is just a con game. We said that you have to have tax cuts for folks in the middle. We did not think that we should have millionaires who are now going to get an average annual tax cut of $70,000 a year. We didn't think we needed to do that as a country. And while we've supported corporate tax reform in a smart way that doesn't blow up the debt, this is a total corporate giveaway. And a big chunk of it's going to go to foreign shareholders, by the way.
Senator Van Hollen, with all due respect, why not fight for what you believe in? Why not go in there with an amendment? I mean, even if it were just to address the issue that you know Republicans are going to have to answer for now, and that's sunsetting any kind of a clause for cuts for the middle class.
Yeah. Actually, you must not have been paying attention because we offered a lot of amendments on the floor of the Senate. There were no hearings, but we did have a chance to offer amendments, and we offered lots of them. In fact, one of the amendments we offered was to make good on the promise that candidate Trump made on the campaign trail. Whenever he talked about tax reform and the tax code, he said, we got to get rid of this carried interest loophole. He said, quote, he said the hedge fund guys are getting away with, quote, murder. Guess what? You got a bill that's over 500 pages long. They haven't gotten rid of the carried interest loophole for hedge fund managers. So it's just that's a farce, right? That's not tax reform. When the thing the president spoke most about on the campaign trail is not fixed in this bill, when you have millions and billions of middle-class Americans paying more, so corporations can pay a lot less. That's not middle class first.
Right, and I've read about the carried interest. It is north of $400 billion that it will cost to give that sort of a loophole oxygen, if you will, to keep it in play. I understand that, and I understand what you're saying, that you put forth amendments. I think what people thought, and Americans whom I've talked with, American voters, thought that this was going to be a situation where you would come to the table. So when you see two leadership, Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer, not come to the table at the White House the first time, they went back the second time over a potential government shutdown, the question then looms, did Democrats really fight hard enough? Notwithstanding the amendments that you think I fell asleep on, but that forward motion of were you able to work through to get one thing that you thought needed to be in there?
Well, we, for example, didn't think that any middle-class family should have to have a tax increase. Republicans voted against that. They voted very clearly to raise taxes on millions of folks in the middle class. We tried to fix the issue with respect to the corporate tax cut, which is actually going to encourage more American businesses to move their jobs and plants overseas, because now, if you're an American corporation, the taxes you pay on your business overseas are going to be a lot less than the one you pay here at home. So we did offer amendments to try and fix all these things. When it came to the corporate tax cuts, we should say, rather than just assume that these corporations are actually going to increase the wages of their employees, let's make that more of a condition, right? Because we've already seen these companies, they're going to get these big tax breaks. They're already talking about using the savings for what?
Right.
For stock buybacks, not for wage increases. So, look, we'll find out. They were promised $4,000 paycheck increases. I don't think that that's going to happen, but we will see.
Then the question becomes, as we've seen with other things, will you at least give a go at whatever does work in all of this? We'll have to see how it plays out in the midterm elections. Senator Chris Van Hollen from the great state of Maryland, thank you for joining us today.
Good to be with you. Thanks.
President Trump is soon going to welcome Republican lawmakers to the White House after the historic tax cuts passage. We'll talk with the White House chief tax writer, who will be attending that celebration next. And lawmakers are now saying yesterday's testimony from Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe conflicts with previous witness testimony. Now they want to issue fresh subpoenas. What this could mean for the Russia investigation and whether it's time for a second special counsel. Stay with us. Here we go. On the day that House lawmakers and Senate lawmakers on the Republican side were able to get it done on their own, a huge day for tax reform in this country. The president saying, call it Tax Cuts and Jobs Act as it's titled. Well, they're about to see him. Because lawmakers, and we had Peter Ducey outside talking with some of these lawmakers as they were headed out. Now they are getting on those shuttles. The celebration at the White House is due up in about 90 minutes or sooner. We'll see some portions of them landing at the White House, as I like to say, and then going in for the victory lap. So I wanted to give you a live picture of the history being made today, because that is, in fact, what it is. And now we'll move on. New concerns just a day after the House Intelligence Committee spent nearly 8 hours asking questions of Deputy FBI Director Andrew McCabe about potential anti-Trump bias at his agency and on the special counsel. Congressional investigators say his testimony conflicted numerous times with previous witness testimony. They say Republicans on the committee now want to issue new subpoenas next week to the Justice Department and the FBI personnel, though they would not say who exactly they want to hear from. Meanwhile, tomorrow, demoted Justice Department